Hello, horror fans. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying tales, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These 3 beach horror stories are not for the faint of heart. I've collected them from witnesses who still have nightmares about what happened to them near the water. If you're watching this alone tonight, you might want to turn on another light. Let's begin. The dark shape. Lauren had waited all year for her family's annual beach vacation in North Carolina's Outer Banks. At 19, she knew this might be her last summer trip before college consumed her time. The rental house sat directly on the beach, with nothing but sand dunes between the back porch and the vast Atlantic Ocean. Their first 2 days were perfect. Sunshine, gentle waves, and cool evening breezes. On the 3rd morning, Lauren woke up early before anyone else. The sun had just started rising, painting the sky in beautiful shades of pink and orange. Perfect time for a quick swim, she thought. Lauren left a note for her parents and walked down to the beach. The water was calm and inviting. No one else was around, just Lauren and the endless ocean. She waded in until the water reached her waist, then started swimming parallel to the shore. About 15 minutes into her swim, Lauren felt something change. The water seemed colder suddenly. She stopped and treaded water, looking around. The beach appeared farther away than it should be. Had a current pulled her out? As she started swimming back toward shore, Lauren felt something brush against her leg. Something solid, something large. She told herself it was just seaweed. But seaweed doesn't move against the current. Seaweed doesn't feel like firm, rough skin. Lauren swam faster, her heart racing. Again, something touched her foot. This time, it wasn't just a brush. It felt like fingers. Cold, strong fingers, wrapping around her ankle for just a second before letting go. Panic surged through her body. She was still at least 50 yards from shore. Lauren started swimming harder than she ever had before, her arms burning with effort. Then she saw it. About 10 feet ahead of her, something dark broke the surface of the water. It wasn't a dolphin fin. It wasn't a shark. It looked like the top of a human head, but wrong somehow. Slick and hairless, with what appeared to be ridges running across the skull. It disappeared beneath the waves instantly. Lauren froze in terror, treading water, scanning the surface desperately. Where did it go? Was it beneath her right now? The water around her was clear enough that she should be able to see anything approaching. But there was nothing visible below, just empty blue fading to darkness. Lauren started swimming again, her eyes stinging with tears of fear. Every few seconds, she would look back over her shoulder, expecting to see that horrible head again, or worse, to feel those cold fingers grabbing her. When the water was waist deep, Lauren stood up and started wading as fast as she could. Her legs felt like lead, as if the water itself was trying to hold her back. That's when she noticed something strange on the beach ahead. A trail in the sand, leading from the water's edge up toward the dunes. It wasn't like footprints, but rather a wide, dragging path, as if something heavy had pulled itself from the ocean. The trail led straight toward her family's beach house. Lauren ran the rest of the way, her feet slipping in the wet sand. When she reached the house, she burst through the door, startling her parents who were just waking up. "What's wrong?" her mother asked, seeing Lauren's terrified face. Between gasps for breath, Lauren tried to explain what had happened. Her father, concerned, went to check outside. Lauren begged him not to go, but he insisted. He returned 10 minutes later, saying he'd found nothing unusual. No trail in the sand, no sign of anything strange. He suggested that stress about starting college was giving her an overactive imagination. Lauren let them believe that. It was easier than arguing. But she knew what she had seen. That night, Lauren couldn't sleep. Her bedroom window faced the ocean, and she kept the blinds firmly closed. Around 3 a.m., she heard something on the back porch. A wet, slapping sound like something damp dragging itself across the wooden boards. Then came the scratching at her window. Gentle at first, then more insistent. Lauren lay frozen in her bed, too terrified to move, too terrified to scream. The scratching continued for almost an hour before finally stopping. When morning came, Lauren's father found long, deep grooves in the wooden windowsill. He blamed raccoons, but raccoons don't leave behind small patches of slick, greenish skin stuck in the splinters. The family cut their vacation short, claiming bad weather was coming. Lauren never told them about the small puddles of salt water she found outside her bedroom door on that last morning, or about the whispers she heard through the window, whispers in a gurgling voice that sounded like drowning. 2 weeks after they returned home, Lauren saw a small news article. A family had gone missing from the same beach house they had rented. The police found no signs of struggle, just wet trails leading from each bedroom down to the ocean's edge. Lauren never swims in the ocean anymore. Sometimes, when she's alone at night, she still hears that wet, slapping sound outside her window. And she knows whatever was in the water that day has followed her home. If you're enjoying these frightening tales so far, make sure to hit that like button. Trust me, the stories get even scarier from here. The Midnight Beach Mark needed a break from his high-stress job in Chicago. When his friend offered him a beach house in a small Florida town for 2 weeks, he jumped at the chance. The house was isolated, sitting on a private stretch of beach about a mile from the nearest neighbor. Perfect for unwinding, Mark thought. No people, no noise, just peace and quiet. The first few days were exactly what he needed. Long walks on the empty beach, afternoons reading on the porch, and nights falling asleep to the sound of gentle waves. Mark felt his stress melting away. On his 5th night, Mark woke suddenly around midnight. Something had disturbed his sleep, though he wasn't sure what. He lay still, listening. The usual sounds of the ocean came through his open window, but something else too. Voices. Mark got up and looked out the window. The beach was bathed in moonlight, making the sand glow an eerie silver white. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then movement caught his eye. People, dozens of them walking along the shoreline. In the middle of the night, Mark squinted, trying to make out details. The figures moved strangely with stiff, awkward motions. They seemed to be dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Long dresses for the women, suits for the men. But everything was soaking wet, clinging to their bodies. What kind of midnight beach party was this? Mark grabbed his phone to take a video, but when he looked back, the beach was empty again. He blinked, confused. Had he imagined it? Was he still half asleep? The next morning, Mark walked down to where he thought he'd seen the figures. The sand showed no footprints except his own. He felt foolish for being spooked by what was probably just a dream. That day, Mark drove into town for supplies. At the small grocery store, he casually mentioned to the cashier that he was staying at the Blue Beach House on North Point. The cashier's friendly smile faltered. That place? It's been empty for years. Mark explained that his friend owned it and had lent it to him. Oh, she said, looking uncomfortable. That must be the new owner then. Not many people want to stay there, not since what happened. When Mark pressed her for details, she reluctantly told him that 50 years ago, a cruise ship had sunk during a storm just offshore from that beach. Over 100 passengers drowned. Many of the bodies washed up on that exact stretch of shoreline. Some locals say they still walk the beach at night, the cashier said, then quickly added, "But that's just an old story." Mark laughed it off, but as he drove back to the house, doubt crept in. That night, he made sure all his windows were closed and locked before going to bed. Again, he woke at midnight. This time, he heard singing, a faint, mournful melody, like a hymn sung by many voices. Despite his fear, Mark felt drawn to look outside. The beach was filled with people again, more than before. They stood in the shallow water, facing the sea, all singing the same sad song. Mark's skin prickled with goosebumps. These figures seemed more solid than before. He could make out details: a woman in a dress with Gibson girl hair, a man in a captain's uniform, children in old-fashioned sailor suits. They suddenly stopped singing and, as one, turned to face the house. Face him. Mark ducked down below the windowsill, his heart hammering in his chest. After counting to 30, he slowly raised his head to peek out again. The beach was empty. But now wet footprints led from the water's edge directly toward his house. Mark ran to check the doors. Both front and back were still locked. He stood in the living room, listening intently. Water dripped somewhere inside the house. Plip, plop, plip, plop. Following the sound, Mark tracked it to the bathroom. The floor was covered with puddles of seawater, and in the tub lay a soaking wet child's doll, ancient and rotting, its glass eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Mark packed his bags and left within the hour, driving through the night to get as far away as possible. When he called his friend the next day to explain why he'd left, his friend was confused. He didn't own a beach house in Florida. He'd never even been to that town, and he certainly hadn't offered Mark a place to stay. Police later investigated the house Mark described. They found it abandoned with years of dust undisturbed, except for one set of footprints, Mark's. And in the bathroom, they discovered a single word written in the dust on the mirror: welcome. The cruise ship that sank 50 years ago was called the Midnight Star. Every year on the anniversary of the sinking, locals avoid that stretch of beach. Because sometimes, on clear nights when the moon is bright, wet footprints appear on doorsteps throughout the town, and children's dolls soaked with salt water show up in the most impossible places. If this story sent chills down your spine, you'll want to brace yourself for our final tale. Don't forget to comment below about which story scares you most. Now, let's continue with our last terrifying beach encounter. The thing that feeds. Researchers Miranda and Ethan weren't on vacation. The small beach in Washington State was their workplace, the site of their marine biology study on tidal pool ecosystems. For 3 months, they would live in the small cabin overlooking the rocky shore, documenting changes after the recent earthquake had reshaped parts of the coastline. The location was perfect, isolated, untouched, and rich with marine life. Too perfect, as they would soon discover. Their first week went according to plan. They established monitoring stations along the shore, photographed and cataloged species, and settled into a comfortable routine. Miranda focused on invertebrates while Ethan studied algae growth patterns. On day 8, Miranda noticed something odd in one of the deeper tidal pools. A strange, pulsing mass clung to the underside of a rock. It wasn't a sea anemone or any jellyfish species she recognized. The mass was about the size of a softball, translucent, but with swirls of iridescent blue throughout its body. She photographed it but decided not to disturb it. New species discoveries weren't unheard of, especially after seismic activity exposed previously hidden areas of the ocean floor. The next morning, the mass had doubled in size. Now basketball-sized, it had moved to the center of the pool. Even stranger, the usual inhabitants of the pool, small fish, crabs, and sea stars, were gone. The water around the mass seemed clearer, almost sterile. Ethan suggested they take a sample. Using a sterilized container, Miranda carefully collected a small piece of the organism. Under their portable microscope, what they saw defied explanation. The cells were unlike anything in their reference materials. Not quite plant, not quite animal. The cellular walls appeared to be constantly changing, reorganizing themselves as they watched. That night, they emailed photos and notes to their university department head, hoping for some insight. They went to bed excited about what might be a significant discovery. Around 2:00 a.m., Miranda woke to a strange sound, a wet, sucking noise coming from outside. She looked out the window toward the shore. The night was clear, the full moon illuminating the beach. Something was moving across the rocks. Something large. She woke Ethan, and they watched together as a massive shape hauled itself from pool to pool. It resembled the mass they'd found, but now it was the size of a small car, glistening wetly in the moonlight. As it moved, parts of it would extend forward, pull the main body along, then reabsorb into the whole. Even from the cabin, they could hear it feeding, that horrible sucking noise as it enveloped everything in each pool before moving to the next. Fish, plants, crustaceans, nothing escaped. "We need to document this," Ethan whispered, grabbing his camera. Despite Miranda's protests, he slipped outside with his camera and started recording from behind a large rock about 50 feet from the thing. Through the window, Miranda watched in horror as the creature suddenly stopped moving. It seemed to ripple, then extend a thick tendril into the air, waving it back and forth as if sensing. It found Ethan in seconds. The tendril whipped toward him faster than he could react. Miranda wanted to scream, to warn him, but her voice caught in her throat. The tendril wrapped around Ethan's ankle. He fell, the camera tumbling from his hands. Then the thing began pulling. Ethan clawed at the rocks, his fingernails tearing as he desperately tried to hold on. But the creature was too strong. It dragged him across the jagged surface toward the main mass, his screams cutting through the night air. Miranda finally found her voice and screamed his name. She ran outside, grabbing a piece of driftwood as a weapon. But she was too late. The mass enveloped Ethan feet first. His screams became gurgling cries, then silence as he disappeared completely into the pulsing creature. The entire process took less than 30 seconds. Miranda fled back to the cabin, locking the door behind her. Through her tears, she called the emergency services, though she could barely explain what had happened. Who would believe her? She stayed locked inside until dawn, watching as the creature slowly retreated to the deeper water as the sun rose. When the police finally arrived, there was no sign of it, just a trail of barren tidal pools, completely stripped of life, leading to the water's edge. Ethan's body was never found. The camera, recovered from the rocks, contained only static after the moment the tendril appeared. The authorities concluded he had fallen into the sea and drowned. Only Miranda knew the truth. The university terminated the research project. The official report cited unexpected coastal erosion, making the site unsafe. No mention was made of the samples they'd collected, which mysteriously disappeared from the lab storage. 6 months later, reports began surfacing of missing swimmers and boaters along the Washington coast. Witnesses described seeing unusual blue lights beneath the water before people disappeared. Marine life in the region started declining rapidly. Miranda tried warning the authorities about what she'd seen, but they dismissed her as traumatized from losing her colleague. She started her own research, tracking similar incidents around the world. She discovered that following major seismic events, earthquakes, underwater volcanic eruptions, similar disappearances and marine life die-offs often occurred. Something ancient lives in the deep sea trenches, she believes. Something that occasionally rises when the earth shifts and breaks the barriers holding it down. Something that feeds and grows and changes. Something that has developed a taste for humans. Miranda doesn't go near the ocean anymore. She moved to a small town in Arizona, as far from any coastline as she could get. But she still wakes up some nights, her sheets soaked with sweat, hearing that wet, sucking sound in her dreams. And recently, she's noticed something troubling. Local news reports of strange, iridescent blue puddles appearing after heavy rains, and small animals found completely drained of all organic material. As if something was feeding, as if something had followed her. Thank you for listening to these 3 terrifying beach horror stories. If you enjoyed being scared, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more true horror tales every week. Share your own scary beach experiences in the comments below. What strange things have you seen in the water? Remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't just in our imagination. Sometimes they're waiting just beneath the surface, watching, hungry, waiting for you to dip your toes in the water. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next video. If you're brave enough to come back,